Hello guys, I am thankful for 600 sub, and this will be 600 sub special. Y'all are all stars THX, and we shall get started with this banger what if. And sometimes, and after this one I will be doing part 2 to all my people who commented for part 2. So yeah, let's get started with what if Naruto had Thor's hammer. When he was little, Naruto had a gift. Whenever he was upset or angry, storm clouds would form around Konoha, and it would rain for a week. When he was 3, there was an incident with another village that resulted in 2 enemy nin being almost electrocuted to death because they tried to kill the only witness to a crime they were committing. Thanks to his actions, a good shinobi was spared, as was the girl they were trying to kidnap. However, it alerted the aging Hokage that his gift needed to be curtailed before it got any stronger. At least until he was old enough to handle the responsibility. And so a second seal was placed on him, in conjunction to the original one he had been given mere hours upon birth. When he was 8, that seal almost shattered under the strain of trying to protect him. And so it was strengthened and a watch placed on him. Then everything changed the day of the academy exams. He had failed miserably at that, all because they didn't allow 2 out of 3 jutsu to pass. And so he jumped at the chance to pass, if only so he could fulfill his dream of being Hokage and gain the respect he deserved. People didn't harass the old man as much as they did him. He was still carrying the forbidden scroll when he damn near crashed into it. Naruto, having slammed into a tree from tripping over something in a minor crater, shook off the collision with practiced ease. Then he went to find out what the heck caused him to have a date with a tree. It was old. At least old enough to have gotten a lot of growth around it. Clearing away the plants with his old kunai, he stared. He could feel in his very bones that it was not something that most shinobi could simply order and use at will. There was a sort of aura about it that practically screamed it was a legendary weapon. Possibly enough to earn the title of a super cool shinobi if he learned how to use it. The moment his hands closed around the hilt, he felt something strange. Like it was testing him. Seeing if he was worthy to wield it. Which was silly. How could a weapon test someone? He was able to partially lift the hammer, but the shifting of the scroll reminded him he didn't have much time. So he left it on the ground near it, under all the cut-away plants, so he could come back and get it later. His life was ruined, all because of that damn Mizuki. Sure, he got some super cool jutsu out of it, but it wasn't worth being banned from taking the exams and being put under watch for the rest of his life. Those old crones that advised the old man had made it clear that Naruto would never be a shinobi if they had any say in it, not after he was caught by a hiding ANBU with the scroll. Even if Mizuki was caught and arrested, the fact remained he had stolen an important document. Because he hadn't graduated, he was still under the watch of the civilian council. That meant they had almost complete control over his life. He was sick of it. He was sick of Konoha and sick of being jerked around like a puppet. After eating his ramen, he came to a decision. He'd leave Konoha. He knew that other villages would be interested in a kid who could steal an S-class document and take out a Kage with a single jutsu. It wasn't like he had anything left to lose anymore. Sure, he'd miss Ayam and Tucci, and their delicious ramen. And Irika, to an extent, if only because he wasn't a total dick like Mizuki. The old man had been rather harsh with him, so he had no real opinions on the one person who had kept him alive for the demon he contained. Oh yes, Mizuki had been positively gleeful about dropping that little bomb on him before he tried to steal the scroll from him. He gathered up what little he could call his own. Namely his plants and the few clothes that weren't basically scraps at this point. He finished off the food in the fridge, as he had always been quite good at foraging compared to the other students. He could live out in the wild, so long as he avoided people. And he could pick up that weapon he tripped over. He highly doubted anyone would actually miss the thing, considering how overgrown it had been. Heimdall had felt the tremors in the stars long before Thor went missing. He was alive, but no longer in the physical form. A fact that devastated his mother, and to some extent Loki as well. So when he felt the song of Mjolnir once more, he barely dared to hope. The first song was faint, barely able to reach Asgard. The second time was much stronger, and he knew someone had claimed the hammer. Using his powers, he was able to find a single blonde boy who bore remarkable resemblance to Thor, only he most certainly wasn't him. A son, perhaps? Heimdall sent a summons to Odin. If this was Thor's heir, then they needed to be ready for him. What is it, Heimdall? What do you see? Asked Odin, when he arrived less than half an hour later. He had come as soon as he could, hoping the gatekeeper had found Thor. Sire, someone has claimed Thor's hammer. Odin felt a surge of hope. Perhaps Thor had found his weapon after so long? It is a child. It took a few moments to process this declaration, before Odin carefully asked, do you believe it to be Thor's? There is some resemblance to the mortal form he was banished in. More than enough to warrant a test of his blood to see if there is indeed a legacy. Where is he? I shall summon him momentarily. He is too deep in territory that could draw undue attention to us, and might bring the mortals to Asgard. They have techniques that span the realm of time and space, explained Heimdall. It took far too long for Odin's liking, but once the child was far enough from the mortals' hidden village he acted. The moments it took for the Bifrost to bring its surprised passenger were almost unbearable. The entire kingdom had mourned when it heard Thor was unreachable and possibly lost. Odin examined the boy, who had ran until he was so tired he couldn't possibly stay awake. He looked like a peasant at best, and an orphan at worst. Bring him to EIR. We shall test the bloodline while she examines him, said Odin. He could see Mjolnir was clearly visible in the child's rough bag, nestled safely next to some plants that were well cared for. As you wish, sire, agreed Heimdall. It had been far too long since they had any hope to find Thor. If not for the hammer, Heimdall never would have been able to find where he landed, for he had somehow been thrown horribly off course. Frigga was quick to pounce on her husband when she heard of the child now safely in the infirmary. Is it true? Has he returned? She asked, not daring to hope. Patience, wife. Thor has not returned, but there is a possibility he left a child behind. A boy has claimed Thor's hammer, and Heimdall has retrieved him from one of the mortal worlds, said Odin. Frigga sagged. She wanted her son back, but the idea of a grandson to spoil and train was enough to lift her spirits. I have EIR testing his blood now to see if he is indeed Thor's son. Even if he is not, he will be welcomed as one of our family. EIR walked up to the king and his wife. Her face spoke volumes. My lord Odin, I have tested the blood. He does bear the prince's bloodline. The child is indeed Thor's son. However, while we were examining him we found something strange. Prince Loki is examining the boy as we speak. Frigga didn't hesitate. This child was the last link to her firstborn, and anything that required Loki's help generally meant magical interference. Naruto didn't open his eyes immediately. He knew something weird had happened because he had most definitely fallen asleep on the cold, unforgiving ground, and now he was on the softest bed he had ever been on in his life. Plus the smell was all wrong, as were the sounds. Some of the lessons at the academy stuck, much as he hated that place and everything to do with it. He woke up slowly, and took stock of his surroundings. He definitely wasn't in Konoha anymore. He noticed his plants were safely on the table next to him, as was that weird hammer he found. Though it was on the floor and on its side. He also found his goggles on the table, next to the plant. The plants. His clothes were nowhere to be found. He also found a glass of water, which was great because he was really thirsty. It looks like you're finally awake, said a pleasant voice. He settled on a woman with a motherly feel about her. Something about her seemed to tell him he could trust her, and it didn't feel fake like it did with Shinobi. Try as they might, he could always tell when they were just putting on a show. That was because they could never put down their assassin's instinct. She didn't have that. Who are you? My name is Frigga. I'm your grandmother. So my nephew has finally woken up? Asked Loki. Yes. Aside from some malnutrition which we can remedy rather easily, and the strange markings on him, there seems to be no damage. He's unusually well developed for his age, however. Queen Frigga is with him now. Likely explaining why it took so long for us to find him, and where he is, snorted Loki. A minor punishment spiraled completely out of hand, and now they were finally cleaning up the last of the mess left behind. The boy was Thor's heir, and it was clear he would need to be trained. The moment Loki removed that odd magical seal on the boy's neck, storm clouds had filled the room. It had taken an hour for him to disperse them, and the child wasn't even trying to cause trouble. But what worried him the most was the fact he sensed a great beast lurking in the boy's mind. One that was unusually intelligent, for the brief time he had spoke with it. This QB was more than happy to fill in some of the blanks, like why the boy had abandoned the mortals' village, and had been sleeping in the woods with the bare minimum to survive. Frigga had been absolutely livid. Finally Loki went in, and found the boy animatedly chatting about plants of all things. Naruto, this is your Uncle Loki. Blue eyes like a wild sea looked into his emerald green. Something about them seemed familiar, and then he recalled what the massive fox spirit had told him. This was someone who understood very well the same pain Loki had gone through years ago. It had taken Thor being essentially declared dead for him to reconcile with his parents, even if finding out he had been adopted had come as a nasty shock. "Hi," he said shyly. Right, the boy wasn't used to having family, much less people who genuinely cared about him. Perhaps a good shock might loosen his tongue. That massive fox you have sealed inside of you was quite vocal about his approval of you leaving. Something about Red Eyes not being able to find him on another world, said Loki dryly. The boy's eyes went wide, and he almost thought for a moment they would pop out in shock. You talked with the QB, he said in shock. You'll find that most things with that level of power are generally intelligent enough to converse. The trick is convincing them it's worth their time to do so. He's not a mindless beast, said Loki. Naruto looked pensive, until he suddenly realized there was yet another storm cloud hovering over him. He tried to swat it away, only to be shocked by a tiny lightning bolt for his trouble. His already spiky hair was now standing on end. Stupid clouds. Why do they keep coming back? He complained. Loki smirked. I found a magical seal on your neck that was used to repress your natural powers. Someone went to a lot of trouble making sure you were unable to learn how to control them naturally. The moment he heard that, Naruto scowled at the reminder. It was remarkably like Loki's own angry scowl when someone went out of their way to cause him trouble. Though most generally didn't anymore because he could be twice as nasty. Stupid old man. I bet he had something to do with it. Ah yes, your fire shadow. I believe Mother and Odin would be delighted to speak to him, said Loki. Though his tone of voice practically said volumes of how that meeting would end up going. The fox had also been paying more attention than the one who was unlucky enough to be his prison. He knew that the old man had only done the bare minimum of providing for him, and despite his wishes, Naruto had almost no connections to the village at all. At this point he could care less if it burned so long as 1 or 2 people were allowed to escape the disaster. Which mostly consisted of the ramen chef and his daughter. Not my problem. If you want to light a fire under the old man's ass, I could provide you all the blackmail material you'd need, said Naruto. Oh? He's a total pervert. He has this secret safe behind the bookshelf that has all these orange books written by some sage that are full of adult-only material. If you stole them all, he'd panic more than if you stole the Forbidden Scroll. Though if you did, I wouldn't recommend opening them since I trapped most of them, said Naruto vindicatively. Frigga hid a smile. I think you and your uncle are going to get along just fine. But I'd better not hear that you've been corrupting your nephew, said Frigga. How could I ever corrupt him? Asked Loki innocently. Naruto snorted from the bed. You need to work on your innocent face more. I barely know you and even I can tell it's completely fake, said Naruto flatly. Loki smirked at him. I can tell we're going to have a lot of fun together. While word quickly spread about a lost son of Thor, very few had actually seen the boy in person. This was in no small part due to the fact that because of the seal, Naruto had very little, if any, control over the storms that kept popping up. Loki gave him a month before he learned to control them. It was only natural then that when Lady Sif met a blonde child with blue eyes, she was unaware of his true heritage. She had been out keeping the peace when he had been found, after all. Unfortunately, it would go down in the memories of the guards that while Thor's lost son might look like his father, he almost certainly took after Loki in personality. And to make matters worse, he was far more experienced than the prince in evading capture, and had all the energy of a squirrel on coffee. It was really a pity about that vase. It had been a perfectly ordinary day, and Sif had taken to the training grounds. Word had reached her about a legacy left by Thor, which sounded ridiculous because last time she checked, he had no heir. Ever since he was declared dead, some child or another popped up out of the woodwork claiming to be his heir every year or so, if not sooner. So when she found a blonde child watching her with open interest, she attempted to ignore him. However, after a few hours, the child got bored and started talking. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, save for the fact that the brat wouldn't shut up. Considering his hair color and the fact he wasn't being chased out by the guards, she was betting he was the result of one of Fandrel's indiscretions. He was a loud mouth as well, and he did somewhat look like him. Finally she couldn't take it anymore. "Look, you little nuisance, why don't you go play?" she said irritably. Ever since Thor disappeared, they had been working harder than ever to keep the peace. "I'm not allowed to leave the castle grounds until I learn to keep my power under control," said the blonde nuisance. "Then go bother someone else," said Sif irate. "I'm supposed to stay in one place until it's time for my lessons, so I picked here. It's peaceful." There were many words to describe the royal training grounds, but peaceful wasn't one of them. In fact, it was downright noisy with all the training going on. Sif's annoyance only got worse as the afternoon seemed to drag on. The brat didn't leave and more importantly wouldn't let her train in peace. She had enough. "Look, just go away and leave me alone, you stupid brat. Children shouldn't even be here, so go run along to your mother." She completely missed the hurt look on his face, which quickly shifted into a blank one. Had she known more about him, she would have been more worried about what he did next. "Suit yourself, lady, but don't come whining to my uncle when you realize that words hurt," said the boy cryptically. Oh, how she would come to hate being on the wrong end of the boy's devious mind. An hour later. Sif was rather irritated when Fandrel didn't own up to the pest she had dealt with earlier. She was about to head into her room when it happened. Something foul-smelling and sticky was dumped onto her as she tripped over a wire she hadn't spotted quickly enough. Shrieking in rage, she immediately started to look for Loki. It took her 2 seconds to spot the smug expression on that blonde child's face, before she immediately began chasing him. She didn't care whose child he was going to get what he deserved. "Get back here, you brat. Catch me if you can, old hag," he countered with a laugh. Sif hated to admit it, but the boy was quick and more slippery than an eel. Every time she thought she had him, he would use the nearby surroundings and practically jump around like a monkey, evading her grasp. As fit as she wasn't nearly as adept at making hairpin turns, or using her surroundings to her advantage. And the one time she tried throwing a knife at him to startle him into slowing, or panicking, he expertly dodged it, then grabbed it, and tossed it back in her general direction. It was a very sloppy throw, but the fact was that his aim was almost good enough to hit her, and that had caught her off guard. It took her a few moments to realize her quarry had escaped. And half an hour before she gave up and cut her losses. With Naruto. He was grinning madly, despite being in the custody of his uncle. Loki had come looking for him, partly for his magic training. He was 5 minutes late, but mostly because he had heard the commotion. "May I ask what Lady Sif did to earn a bucket full of some rather foul-smelling slime and oils? She called me a stupid brat, and she wasn't very nice." It didn't take much for him to put two and two together. Lady Sif had only returned, and had obviously run into his nephew in the training ground where he liked to watch the guards practice. Her foul mood had caused her to be short with him, which resulted in Naruto playing a rather minor, if embarrassing prank. The best part was that Loki could honestly claim no responsibility for the mess, as Naruto hadn't consulted him on the appropriate level for a simple revenge prank, and had evaded capture with the ease of an expert who was used to being chased by enraged warriors. And Frigga had worried that he would corrupt Naruto. The only thing he'd be doing was refine the boy's technique and give him advice on how to incorporate his style of pranks. "You've got that evil look on your face again. Imagining how much trouble I could cause when I use magic rather than simple traps," grinned Naruto. "It takes a prankster to understand a fellow agent of chaos. And mother thought I'd be the one corrupting you. Pranks are the best way to force people into noticing you, if only to beat you into a bloody pulp," said Naruto sagely. "Don't think I didn't notice that sloppy throw. If you're going to be using knives, you are going to learn how to throw and actually hit the broadside of a frost giant," said Loki. Seeing Naruto perk up at the idea, Loki grinned wider. It was nice having a minion, or apprentice, to train. Especially one with a like mind. Plus there was the small fact he'd be getting a good show once Sif found out whose son Naruto was. "Now it's time for you to learn the basics of magic." "Yay! Training," said Naruto with genuine enthusiasm. Naruto fidgeted in his seat, mostly because he wasn't used to having clothes that not only fit, but were his actual size. Thankfully the guy in charge of taking his measurements had put some orange in. Something about him being a summer more than a spring or winter, whatever that meant. He was born in the fall as far as he knew. "I would tell you to sit still, but I know it's pointless. Instead try to contain your boredom until it's time to eat. No one expects you to know all the formal table manners right away, so do your best to keep your mouth shut while you chew and never talk with food in your mouth," said Loki. "I know. Ayame-chan made sure to correct my eating habits one year when she found out the orphanage never bothered," said Naruto. Loki made a note of anyone that seemed to genuinely care about the boy. So far the only ones to make that extremely short list were a chef and his daughter. It also became very apparent that the boy had absolutely no idea how to use a fork or a knife, but he was very adept at using two odd sticks he had brought with him. Loki had taken a trip to Midgard, and had learned they were called chopsticks. They were very common in the Asian countries as eating utensils, most notably for rice. It had taken little effort to also learn that Naruto's favorite food was from a small island country called Japan. He wondered how quickly a new food type would catch on if they just so happened to bring this Ayame and Tucci to Asgard long enough for them to set up shop. Despite being a trade center, most foods had been around for quite some time, and a new style would most likely go over very well. Particularly if word got around that a recently discovered son of a popular price was frequenting the place regularly. He made a point to pick up more of these chopsticks, so that Naruto would be able to eat with more than just his hands. Considering the nation was still in recovery from some sort of dangerous explosive device that hit two different cities, no one questioned why he was there. From the looks of it, the mortals had only recently ended a war a few years earlier. Loki didn't bother hiding his grin when Sif spotted Naruto at the table in a place of honor. It was clear what her thought processes were, and he couldn't wait to see the expression on her face when she heard Odin's announcement. This would be Naruto's official debut among the Asgard elite, which would trickle down back to their allies and spread across the 9 realms. As he wasn't even considered an adult, and had been in a rather backwater world that hadn't even begun to visit space, no one would question the fact he stayed close to Asgard while they brought him up to speed. Odin stood and everyone was more or less silent. They were all very curious about the blonde child between Loki and Frigga, where Thor used to sit. "Everyone, many years ago I was forced to banish my own son from Asgard as punishment for his arrogance. All the 9 realms mourned his loss when he was declared effectively dead. However, Heimdall came to me with joyous news that Thor's hammer had been found. More importantly, it was claimed by a small child who fit the right age when my son was killed. May I present to you Thor's legacy, his son Naruto. There was stunned silence, and for a moment Naruto worried that he wouldn't be accepted. Then the roar of approval and joy was heard, nearly making him flinch. To be fair, he had no idea how popular his father had been before he vanished. Everyone loved Thor, so finding out he had had a son before his death meant they loved Naruto by extension. It was a strange feeling. However, the best part was seeing the look on Lady Sif's face. Her mouth was wide open in disbelief and horror. There was music, there was plenty of food. He got into an eating competition with Volstagg and won, to the amusement of Loki, and he was more popular than Fandral was for an entire night. Fortunately, no one expected him to be a prodigy, though they watched with approval whenever he managed to rein in the minor storms he kept creating over his head. Apparently Thor had similar issues when he was a child, but had learned to control it over the years. When told his age, he was a child in many ways to the Asgard. No one questioned the lack of control. Loki carried his nephew to his room, where he was out cold before he was even in the bed. For a child who normally had energy to spare, he considered that a victory in itself. Frigga watched the entire thing with approval. It was clear Naruto was very good for Loki, who normally hung to the side. Especially around Lady Sif and the Warriors 3. Naruto had gravitated to Loki without even realizing the significance of it. It had forced Loki into the limelight as Naruto unconsciously sought his approval the entire night. He accepted Frigga's status as his grandmother, and Odin's status as the king, though it was clear he put Odin on the same level of a shadow with less paperwork to deal with to make it easier to remember, but in terms of who he preferred to look up to, it was obvious he preferred Loki. You would make a good father for the boy. I'm sure Thor would approve. Loki blinked, as if such an idea had never occurred to him. It likely hadn't. After all, Naruto had only been in Asgard little over 4 days. I'm not sure that others would agree. Frigga tooted at him. Come now, Loki, surely you've noticed that out of all of us you are the only one that the boy has consistently gone to for advice and support. He trusts me to a point, but whenever he needed help you were the first person he sought out. I assume you're also responsible for the prank on Lady Sif earlier. Word had already spread about Lady Sif being covered in some rather foul-smelling concoction and forced to walk through half the palace just to reach her room and clean up. Everyone assumed Loki had done it. Loki snorted in amusement. That was all Naruto's doing. I had no idea he had pranked Sif until I caught him because he was late for his lessons. Frigga held a hand to her mouth to hide her amusement. She had heard the full story from the guards earlier about how Sif had been short with a blonde brat she had assumed was one of Fandral's, only for the boy to prank her and lead her on a merry chase through the palace. Finding out the boy who had cost her some dignity was Thor's heir had come as a very nasty shock for her. It was yet another sign that Naruto would likely enjoy being Loki's adopted son. It took less than 3 hours for word to spread that Thor's hammer had not only been found, but so had an heir. While some stumbled on the boy's name, the fact remained that the line hadn't been broken. Enemies of Asgard started making plans to dispose of the child, while their allies rejoiced at the fact that Thor had at least left behind an heir to the throne, thus securing the line of succession. Meanwhile, on a certain planet an old man was reaping the seeds he had sown in his folly, worried sick about a small blonde child who had gone missing without a trace, save for a strange seal that not even Jiraiya could figure out. 6 months later. Come on Naruto, put some effort into it, said Loki. 8 knives sailed through the air and thudded into the target. Most, if not all, landed in the center. His aim had improved dramatically, and it didn't hurt that they had forged some new kunai for him to use, all of which were sharp enough to do some real damage. Naruto never regretted picking up the hammer, or leaving the village once. It had been the best decision of his life, and he was enjoying every moment of it. So was the fox inside his body. It had taken them 3 months for Kurama to finally reveal his name, and another month for Loki to find a way to fashion a makeshift body, so that he could roam around. It wasn't very big, barely the same size as a horse, but it was still an improvement over the prison he had been stuck in for over half a century. It was because Loki gave Kurama even a small fraction of his freedom back, with the agreement not to seal him again so long as he didn't cause trouble and guarded Naruto, that the fox had let slip something that had given Frigga and Odin some hope. Thor wasn't entirely as dead as they had been led to believe. As punishment for invoking a local god to seal Kurama into his son, Thor and his wife had had their souls sealed in as well. It was likely the Shinigami had recognized what, or more accurately who Thor was, and decided to add a lesson on top of what Odin had already put into place. As such, Naruto was not only carrying around a massive fox with an anger management issue, but the souls of his parent as well. Odin had gone to Hel, the ruler of the realms of the dead, and asked what needed to be done to free Thor and his wife. The results weren't very promising. The only way to free Thor and Kushin at Uzumaki would be to use at least 2-3 would be preferable infinity stones. Specifically the stones governing the soul, mind and reality. It was dangerous enough having 2 of those together, never mind 3. And they had all been lost or deliberately sealed away. So Frigga and Loki discreetly kept looking, all the while they started catching Naruto up on the training he should have had years ago. He had caught up most of it rather quickly when Loki discovered a unique aspect of the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and had abused it accordingly to ensure Naruto's education was adequate. Thor had never been the most tactful of people, but he had at least known when to keep his mouth shut and to use words rather than violence to get things done. It would seem that this, Konoha, hadn't realized what an asset they lost by neglecting his son. It had taken a few months for Loki to realize what his mother meant, and when he didn't waste any time adopting Naruto. Until they found a way to free Thor and his wife from the seal without killing their son or the fox, Loki would be the father figure in his life. Naruto had been beyond thrilled at the idea, and had taken to copying Loki to some extent. Though that didn't mean he lost his trademark orange. Not by a long shot. He always had it on him somewhere, but now it was in tasteful moderation and didn't make people want to gouge their eyes out. He was still the same prankster he had been before, much to the annoyance of people like Amara and her thug, who were usually on his short list of people to hit, and he was still faster than most of the guards or his father. The only difference now was that people actually wanted to train him, and he seemed to grow in leaps and bounds whenever it came to fighting. Loki had learned rather quickly that teaching the small stuff was going to be nearly impossible for Naruto to use effectively when it came to magic. His reserves were simply too big for him to cast minor illusions or spells without it blowing up in his face. So he started with the big stuff that almost no one used, particularly if it involved the weather or using the wind in some way, and then dialed it down until he couldn't bring it back anymore. It was doing wonders for his control issues. Naruto looked at his dad, who smiled at him proudly. "Well done. Keep this up and I might take you out to the bazaar to pick up a few more books to read." Naruto perked up. He loved to read once Loki had shown him how. Having someone with the patience and time to explain things to him had made a vast difference, and once given a chance he absorbed things like a sponge that had been dry for a long time, and was suddenly dropped in the ocean. He still hated etiquette and politics, but he could sit still long enough as long as he was worn out from training. Kurama only woke up when training was over. He was considered Prince Naruto's pet at this point, but as long as no one harassed him about it he didn't care. It was still a better arrangement than he had before. He walked alongside Naruto, acting as a visible guard for him. Despite all of Loki's best efforts, Kurama was still restricted to less than half a mile from Naruto before the seal forced him back. It didn't take long for Naruto to spot something that caught his interest. Or to be more accurate, for his nose to twitch at a familiar smell that had his mouth watering. "No way." Loki smirked as Naruto practically teleported to a decently sized restaurant that had just opened a few days ago. Hearing his son's happy shout told Loki that the effort of convincing the father-slash-daughter duo to relocate to an unknown location had been entirely worth it. The village known as Konoha seemed to lose some of its appeal when Naruto went missing, and very little was being done to find him. Hearing the circumstances behind why he disappeared, and realizing that far too many of the villagers were very happy to see him gone had made it pathetically easy for Loki to swoop in and convince Tucci that perhaps relocating to a bigger building that could have a potentially large customer base was a good idea. Finding out that the rent would be part of the payment for the building had made the deal even more enticing. It was only after he had packed up everything and left that Loki dropped the bomb that the new village they were moving to was where Naruto was staying at. Loki went in and saw his son happily catching up with his two favorite people from his home. Any chance of him even remotely considering returning to that world were just shot to hell, from his son's expression. "Hey old man, come meet my new dad," said Naruto loudly. It took Tucci 3 seconds to recognize Loki. Once Naruto was successfully distracted by the food, he discreetly spoke to him. "You brought us here deliberately to ensure he doesn't go back, didn't you?" That and because you two were the only people he spoke of that seemed to actually care about his well-being. The fact you've done your best to care and protect for him, as well as you could considering the circumstances, was more than enough to reward you with a new client base. And once word spreads that he frequents this restaurant quite regularly, you'll have no end of customers to choose from. Though if you have someone by the name of Volstagg come in, make sure he pays up front whenever possible. That man's like an Akimichi. Wasn't too hard to guess he might try a dine and dash, said Tucci smugly, patting a rather familiar sack of gold. Now that they were on the same page, Loki tried to emulate his son using the chopsticks. It took some getting used to, especially considering how adept Naruto was at using them, whereas Loki was more accustomed to knives and forks. As if having a new type of food hadn't already made Ichiraku's insanely popular among the commoners, hearing that the youngest prince frequented it with astonishing regularity, at least 3 times a week, made it even more popular. Sure, being paid in coins was a bit strange, mostly in getting used to the new currency, but at least here he didn't have to pay an insurance in case of enemy shinobi attack, or worry if his daughter might be captured in the event of an invasion. Loki would have groaned. Trying to find 3 of the 6 Infinity Stones was giving him a headache. Seeing his son walk into the massive library, he decided to take a break. "What are you and grandmother working so hard on?" "We're trying to find certain stones to free your mother and father from that seal without killing them in the process." Naruto cocked his head in confusion. "Wait, aren't the stones like really well hidden so that even hints of where they are would be insanely difficult to locate?" "Yes." "Then why don't we just find the one that governs time and simply switch them with a couple of fakes? I mean, if there was a different seal to hold back Kurama, then they wouldn't be trapped in it, and we'd be able to catch them up on what happened after the fact," said Naruto. Loki blinked, ran that through his head, and looked ready to hit himself. "I'm becoming too much like Thor. Why didn't I think of that? Replace the seal with something that wouldn't summon a death god, grab the idiot and his wife, then bring them back to Asgard. Sure, they'd be displaced by time, but that was a trivial concern to having 3 of those blasted stones close together. Besides, he had already noticed a hint of where the time stone might be located, and had dismissed it. Now the only trick was to find a seal they could use to replace the one on his son's stomach without disrupting the timeline too much. It looked like he'd be making yet another trip to that blasted planet to pick up as many books on sealing as he could get. "When I get back next week, you're going to help me find a seal that won't restrict your friend too much, but be good enough to hold the majority of him, and once I start fiddling with it," said Loki. "Why me?" "Because this will involve chakra, and despite my proficiency in magic, I'm still having trouble deciphering how to use such energy. That, and he was apparently too old for his coils to be unlocked, so trying to learn outside of books was pointless. Loki used the old paths, and came back in 2 weeks rather than 1. He had to dodge those pathetic shinobi half the time, which was why it took so long. Especially one particularly annoying old man with toads, and another that set his skin scrawling that seemed to have a fascination with snakes. Considering how much this Orochimaru annoyed him, he also pilfered some of his personal research notes as revenge. He also snagged what looked like a massive scroll that fit the basic description of a summoning contract that Kurama had told him about. He promptly dumped most of the books in Naruto's room. I want to see some progress in a decent amount of time, since I still have trouble with this chicken scratch you call words. Naruto looked up from his book, then at the ones his father practically dumped on him. I've never been very good at reading it either, said Naruto. Hell, he was better at reading the books here than he was at reading kanji. And if I got you a tutor in these shinobi arts? I might be able to figure it out eventually. We'll make a trip to this one place I found that has several rather strong shinobi. That and it'll teach the man running it not to mess with me a second time. Want me to give him a Naruto special? Absolutely, said Loki vindicatively. It had become very clear after a mere year that Naruto was just as terrifying to piss off as his father. While his pranks were childish, they were far more creative in their execution. People had to keep an eye out if they had annoyed him, because he would leave traps in places that had his victims and those around them embarrassed for a few hours. And unlike Loki, he didn't have to rely on magic. It was actually the reason why he kept getting past Amara and her thug, who had taken to avoiding Asgard while Naruto was there. He didn't use magic to set up the traps, and she never once considered that he climbed through the window to get into her room. She had spells against flying into it, but not someone who used simple climbing techniques to get in. Especially considering how high up her room was. Which village is it? If it's stone then I can't go, because they hate my father, said Naruto. Loki shook his head. It's some place called Sound. 2 months later. Naruto took his first breath of the air inside the elemental countries, and for a brief moment it felt like he was home. Then reality reasserted itself, and he remembered the truth. It wasn't home, and it never had been. Asgard had been more of a home than this place ever was, and it had never been his fault. It was the shinobi and the civilians who took out their misdirected anger towards someone who had been just as much a victim as they were. And because of what he held, he'd never be allowed to be anything but a shinobi, because of the fact they considered the tailed beasts to be weapons. It was pathetic, really. Say, Dad, would it be possible for us to find and rescue others like me from this forsaken place? I sincerely doubt there are any other heirs to thrones here, deadpan Loki. I was referring to other people who held tailed beasts. I bet they'd like to get away from all the constant fighting and arguing over who did what from before they were born. We can look into it later, preferably once Thor ascends the throne like he should have years ago. Right, gotta find someone to teach me how to read kanji properly, and how to use chakra more efficiently. With their disguises firmly in place, and Kurama's signature effectively hidden under a civilian's amount of chakra, they wandered into grass country, where Loki had followed the girl who he noticed earlier. She had a fiery temper, but her control was efficient, and she was often reading difficult books. Sometime later in the hidden grass village, Karen thought she was being paranoid at first. Who would want to follow a nobody like her? She was just a genin with a proficiency in healing jutsu. There were more important people to follow and kidnap. But she kept seeing people following her. It was never the same people, but the illusion they had wasn't enough to dispel her paranoia. Finally she couldn't take it anymore. And she ended up cornered by a blonde kid and a man with green eyes. She had a kunai in one hand, and was fully prepared to unleash a nasty genjutsu on them both. Wow, you were right, Dad. She is good. Who are you? She demanded. The father raised an eyebrow. We came to offer you a job and a way out of being used as cannon fodder for a village that doesn't seem to really care about its soldiers. Okay, that wasn't what she was expecting at all. What? She said, befuddled. I suck at kanji and my chakra control is shot to hell because it's too big. It's easier to kidnap someone who reads the more difficult books and has decent control than it is to grab some jounin. In exchange you get free room, food and the ability to anywhere you want within reason. Why not simply hire me then? The father snorted. Because I know for a fact you're working with a snake-obsessed fool, and this way you
room, food and the ability to anywhere you want within reason.
Why not simply hire me then? The father snorted. Because I know for a fact you're working with a snake-obsessed fool, and this way you can't use anything you learn against us later. Karen stiffened. There's also the fact we'd pay you handsomely for your help, said the boy, holding up a coin. Karen stared at them incredulous. Just so I have this straight. For helping you read some kanji and work on your chakra control, I get free room and board, and I get paid in actual gold. And I'd be allowed to travel within reason wherever I want. Exactly, said the blonde. Well, there's only one thing to ask. Who are you people and where do I sign up? My name is Uzumaki Naruto, and this is my dad Loki, said the blonde cheerfully. Karen blinked. Uzumaki? As in the Uzumaki clan? From what I've been able to ascertain, his mother was supposed to be the next clan head, had it not be for the fact that the clan was scattered. Your mom wasn't Kushina? Why didn't you say so in the first place, said Karen. I didn't think it mattered. Karen pinched the bridge of her nose. If you had said you were family, then you could have simply gone to the main office and said you were reclaiming me for the clan. There wouldn't be any need to hire me. Later. Karen had all her things sealed into a single scroll, including the book she borrowed from Orochimaru. She took one last look at Kusa village, then left without a second backward glance. She barely liked that place anyway. Needless to say, Naruto had great fun ribbing her about the fact she fainted the first time she saw Asgard and realizing she'd be living in the palace in one of the guest quarters. Report. Well, I confirmed Naruto's alive. And he's apparently traveling with a man with piercing green eyes and a regal attitude. From the looks of it, he was somehow found by one of the noble families and adopted, said Jiraiya. Sarutobi Hiruzen sagged in his chair. Naruto was alive. Just those 3 words seemed to lift a great deal of weight off his shoulders. Any idea who has him? The only thing we have to go on is a name and a basic description. Whoever he is, he's good at illusions. Goes by the name Loki. Why Kusa? Sorry? Why would Naruto be in Kusa now of all times? From what I was able to get out of my contact, he went to the main administration building to file a claim on one of their genin. Here's the file. Uzumaki Karen. He filed it as the heir of the Uzumaki clan, and once they confirmed he was Kushina's son, they handed her over without a fuss. One genin isn't going to make much difference, and from what I got they assumed he was still with us. Sarutobi grimaced. It wasn't public knowledge or even rumored, but the loss of their Jinchuriki was a hard blow. Danzo had been secretly sending out his illegal troops to find and capture Naruto, if only to reseal the fox into one of his pawns. The fact that he had been unable to find a single hint of Naruto meant he was unusually well hidden until now. Keep an eye out for Naruto. If you find him, I want you to do your best to make him your new apprentice. After that mess with Mizuki, there's no way he'll be allowed to make genin normally. Any other academy student, and it would have been met with suspicion for years, and a lowered risk of them making chunin, much less jounin. But this was Naruto, who was almost universally hated in his home village. The councils had it out for him because of what he represented and held, and this was just the worst screw-up in his career. And because of what he was, he'd never be able to be anything but a shinobi. Forcing Jiraiya to make him his apprentice was the only way he'd be able to help a child he considered his grandson. It was days like this that made him wish Minato hadn't died defeating the fox. In Asgard. Get back here with my glasses, Naruto, shouted Karen. She had become a familiar sight in the palace, and much to the relief of the guards having her around helped to curtail some of Naruto's revenge pranking. Some, not all though. If they made the mistake of pissing her off, she'd usually help. Karen was considered a permanent addition to the palace, as she wasn't exactly inclined to leave after being rescued by her cousin. Apparently, it was very common in the elemental countries for extended families to stick together, or at least within shouting distance. And the Uzumaki had always been a close-knit family. At this point she was more like a red-haired older sister of his, and she really didn't mind living in the palace overly much, she stayed outdoors most days anyway. Despite being bigger than most houses she had ever been in, she felt overwhelmed being in such a grand place. With her help, Naruto was able to figure out how to read the books on seals, and how to use his chakra more efficiently. Though it had been rather hilarious to see Frigga's face when she saw him literally walking on water. Naruto grinned, slid around the banister, and kept on running. So Karen got creative and used a genjutsu of a bowl of ramen on one of the tables. The second he slowed down was when he was caught. She tackled him and reclaimed her missing glasses. "I got tricked again," complained Naruto. "Not my fault if you're addicted to ramen. Or that the palace chefs had no idea how to properly cook it." The both looked up when they heard a cough. It was Loki. "Dad/Loki-sensei," came the duo cries of Naruto and Karen. Karen's ability to illusions also extended to magic, and as part of her agreement to help train Naruto, Loki refined that ability. As such, she had immediately started calling him Loki-sensei. "Dare I ask what he did now?" "Stole my glasses," said Karen. "You're almost late for your lessons with Lady Eir." Karen eeped before racing off to meet with the healer. Her talents for healing meant she had gravitated towards Lady Eir. While she couldn't teach her how to use healing chakra, she could teach her how to heal using magic, which Loki openly admitted he wasn't very good at. Eir had been delighted to have such an enthusiastic student. However, that didn't mean she tolerated lateness. Apprentices who were late without a very good reason, such as being held up by one of the royal family, and Naruto didn't count, got the worst assignments for the day. "As for you, you're to get to reading those scrolls." Naruto nodded. "I've almost got the second-tier seals figured out." Karen said that the Uzumaki were always known to have a knack for seals, and that once I learned how to read properly without having the words jump around the page that my ability with them shot up. Naruto had figured out the trick to reading, which still had Karen shaking her head in amusement. He abused the hell out of the shadow clone jutsu. By having 100 clones reading similar books at the same time, he was able to clear his head of any random thoughts. It was the strangest thing Loki had seen, but it was extremely effective, and as all the information came back to Naruto in the end, it allowed him to cover the library in a more efficient manner. Loki shook his head and sent Naruto off to read. 3 months later. He was sure he had it. In fact, he was almost certain of it. Checking other books about the time that he had borrowed from other realms about ancient legends made him almost certain of it. The trick now was convincing his father to let him go look. "What is it?" asked Loki, while they were in the library. "I think I found the Infinity Stone governing time. From my research I think it's somewhere in Jotunheim," said Naruto, not bothering to hide what they were talking about. Loki wasn't fooled for a moment. He knew Amara was in Asgard at the moment, and so was her thug. If Naruto wasn't bothering to hide his voice or discussion, then obviously he wanted to send them on a wild goose chase. Seeing a familiar spy of Amara in the library, Loki withheld a snort of derision. Obviously Amara would head to Jotunheim and to try and find the stone, in order to have a bargaining chip to claim Thor. If he knew her, she'd likely use it to marry his mortal form so she could be queen in the present. When they were alone in Loki's rooms, which had even more books scattered about, he looked at his son with amusement. With all the privacy charms and other miscellaneous magics about his room, no one was stupid enough to spy on him. "So where is it really?" "Somewhere in one of the realms I still can't pronounce. Figured it would be easier for word to spread about a stone in Jotunheim where they don't exactly welcome people from Asgard than it was for them to follow us once I'm allowed to visit the world on official business." Loki patted his head proudly. "You follow the prankster's creed very well, Naruto. When in doubt, misdirect and deliver half-truths," said Loki. "Which is always followed by the other creed. Admit nothing, deny everything and make counter-accusations once the other party makes their claim against you," said Naruto. "No matter how nervous you were about a prank, it always paid to wait for the other party to accuse you first. Otherwise you were practically admitting you knew something, and sometimes what they were accusing you was something completely different. He had learned that one the hard way enough times to learn to keep his mouth shut. Loki took one look at the world it was on and grimaced. If we go there on official business, then it's going to cost you. What? One of the more prominent nobles is having a party, and if you go it'll lead people to believe you're displaying an interest in them. Are they complete dicks? No, just annoying. Then they get minor pranks while we leave shadow clones to do the searching discreetly, said Naruto. He knew better than to ditch a party without hard proof that they found what they were looking for. Did I hear the word party? Loki and Naruto jumped. Karen. You seriously need to ward your windows. Before you two came, no one was crazy or skilled enough to climb through open windows into rooms. And I did ward them. For sound, not for people sneaking in. What are you two creeping about for anyway? We're trying to find a magical artifact that can allow one to traverse time so we can retrieve the fourth Hokage and his wife, instead of them being sealed into Naruto's stomach with Kurama, said Loki. I'm pretty sure that the clan was working on a time travel seal before the village was attacked, and that it wasn't fully completed. Have you considered raiding Yuzushiogakure for that instead of finding some super powerful artifact? Naruto and Loki looked at each other. New plan, we find out where the thing is, leave it there, then I show you how to get to the planet from the past using the old paths, and you find a way to use it to get back, said Loki. They weren't looking for it in the past, and this way they had a backup plan if the first didn't work. Yay! We get to visit the old village. You know odds are you'd find more Uzumaki if we spread word that the clan heir was looking for them. Naruto looked at his father. Personal guard force? With the elite chosen as bodyguards? No one would suspect them, and they are professional assassins. We could have the more noteworthy ones living in the palace or specially appointed housing. It's nothing. We're trying to find a way to bring the Uzumaki to Asgard in a way that allows them to act as a private force only Naruto can use. Family sticks together, and the elemental nations isn't exactly what I'd call a healthy place for those with talent. Far from it, they'd get singled out and killed far too young. Allowing your clan to expand on seals would give us the perfect opportunity to bolster our own defenses and give them safe haven, with a select few acting as Naruto's guards, said Loki. Sounds complicated. Well, family takes care of its own, right? Besides, at least this time those stupid Uchiha jerks won't be able to take all the credit. Mito married the first Hokage, and helped create the village, and yet everyone is quicker to remember how great the Uchiha clan used to be and forgets about how Madara betrayed the Hokage. And they treat the name Uzumaki like it's dirt, said Naruto, practically ranting. Karen's eyes went steely. Yet another reason why they have no say in how you live your life, cousin, said Karen coldly. Naruto had reluctantly explained how he came to Asgard in the first place. Karen wasn't a lawyer, but she did know the gist of hidden village life long enough to gleefully point out that since Naruto claimed Asgard as his home, and they had confirmed he was one of theirs, that Konoha had lost any and all claim on him the moment they declared him one of the heirs. It had to do with clan politics and the fact they had prevented him from being promoted from student, who ranked as a civilian in the hierarchy of a hidden village, to genin, which meant he was a ranked member of their army. Because Naruto had been effectively told he couldn't become genin, despite being tricked, he was still considered a civilian by the standards of the hidden villages. That meant the Hokage legally had zero say in where he lived. And the fact he left the village and now claimed Asgard as his home meant that the old man lost any control he had over him in the first place, as he had no say in how or where civilians lived outside Konoha's boundary. The only time he could tell Naruto what to do would be during times or war or crisis, and that was only if he were inside Konoha. Which meant any chances of him ever returning to the village were shot to hell. The trick here would be convincing Odin to allow it, but if we wait for Kushina to be recognized as the queen, then people won't question her relocating her family somewhere safer and easier to guard. And of course they'd show their appreciation by helping out wherever they can, such as increasing security for the palace and the like, said Loki. You know, sometimes you really remind me of Orochimaru. Only without the creepy snake fetish or vague feeling that you're a pedophile with a thing for young boys, deadpan Karen. Naruto snickered. So basically you're saying he's as sneaky and tricky as Snake? Or a fox, she said, grinning at him. We have another sighting. This time it's on the outskirts of Whirlpool, said Jiraiya. First grass, now Whirlpool. How is he slipping past us? He knew at some point Naruto might try to visit Whirlpool. He had ninja posted around it, and he knew Danzo likely had some as well. Yet somehow Naruto managed to get past all of them and land on the island. There's more. There are reports of a red-haired girl with a loud mouth that fits the general description of Karen Uzumaki. Sarutobi grimaced. Grass had been most displeased finding out that they had let one of their genin go, only to learn she wasn't in Konoha. Learning Uzumaki Naruto was the heir of the Uzumaki clan, but not actually old or ranked enough to warrant clan head anytime soon had come as a nasty shock, especially when they learned about the circumstances behind him leaving Konoha. Relationship with Grass was on shaky ground. He could only hope it didn't crumble out from under them. Alert all outgoing shinobi and everyone on your contact list. I want him found before Danzo or Kami forbid Iwa learns that Uzumaki Naruto is outside our protection. Loki smirked as yet another minion spread the word. Once they had Thor on the throne, Kushina could recall the Uzumaki, and they'd have an entire clan's worth of seal masters capable of reminding people of Asgard's superiority. Really, finding Naruto had given him a new direction to invest his time and energy. It hadn't taken very long for Loki to realize he didn't want the throne of Asgard at all. Having everyone's eyes on him made backroom dealings nearly impossible, and every action he made was scrutinized for any nuance that might be exploited. Having to guard the throne whilst Odin went into one of his hibernation periods had been rather enlightening for him. His work was best suited to the shadows, while his brother, and now his nephew, held the limelight off him. That wasn't to say Naruto had no ability to hide in the shadows. Most of his pranks were done in the dark of night when no one was watching. And he had a way of ferreting out information without having to pay for it. And having his heritage being disclosed privately when Thor was confirmed not so much dead, but as good as, well, it had forced him to look back and see his actions for what they were. Loki would never begrudge his nephew/son the throne. Because on an elemental level, Naruto understood better than anyone had any right to exactly how Loki had always felt. On the outside looking in. Not exactly hated, but most certainly not welcomed without outside interference. Without Thor there, he had found quite a few friendships were more in line with people tolerating his presence to humor the blonde idiot. Naruto was exactly the same. He was an outsider looking in, only unlike Loki he never had anyone bring him even to the fringes. Yet he kept up the same smile, hiding his pain. It wasn't until he was found and brought to Asgard that the smile became real. So yes, Loki would do everything in his power to support his nephew. Even if it meant shifting through the wreck of a destroyed village for a seal that might have been removed before the attack ended. What are you lot doing here? Naruto turned to the source of the voice, to find an old man with faded red hair. Around his shoulder was a scratched and beaten symbol with a familiar spiral. Who are you, old man? I'm asking the questions here. What are you blasted treasure hunters doing here? My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I'm going to be the best there ever is, said Naruto loudly. He had long since abandoned his dream of being Hokage. I'm Uzumaki Karen. The old man looked at Loki. Just call me Loki. We're trying to find an ancient seal rumored to travel time to retrieve the clan head of the Uzumaki clan as well as her husband. The old man seemed to peer into their eyes and realized they were being truthful. Well, you're looking in the wrong spot. And anyway, the way to the seal won't open without the blood of a living Uzumaki, so you'll have to prove your claims. Especially the blonde. They followed him, though only Loki did so warily. What they found could only be called an underground temple. The old man waited, but Loki wisely did not enter. I am only related to Naruto through his father. I have no Uzumaki blood to test. The old man nodded. Good enough for me. At least you're honest about it. Hey old man. How do we prove we're Uzumaki? Cut your hands and put it on the pillar. If you're really Uzumaki, then the way will open. If you're not, then I wouldn't want to be you, he said flatly. You're surprisingly helpful. And completely unafraid of the repercussions should you deceive us, said Loki. I'm already dead. A mere chakra ghost that the elders put into place to ensure that the remnants were able to pick up the pieces later and to trap grave robbers, he replied. Fascinating, said Loki. And it was. Inside the shrine. I can't believe that trip to that realm was a total bust. I mean, we had to suffer through that stupid party for nothing, complained Naruto, as they descended deeper into the ground to find the seal. I know, grumbled Karen. And where is this stupid seal anyway? There's no reason to put it this deep down. Unless it's a seal of such super awesomeness that it had to be hidden away. I mean, could you imagine how IWA would use a seal that allowed time travel? Karen shivered at the mere idea of such a thing. Any shinobi village with the ability to time travel was a bad thing, and would almost certainly spark another war, regardless of who had it. The bijou on their own was bad enough to deal with. I think we're here, said Karen. There was another door. Naruto put a freshly bloodied hand to it, as did Karen. It slowly swung open, revealing a massive, if incomplete sealing array. The moment they stepped into it, however, and Naruto's blood dripped onto the seal, it activated. Loki was far too late to stop it from transporting Naruto and Karen into the past. 15 years in the past. Ow. What the hell just happened and who can I kill for it? Snarled Karen. Naruto looked around and found the door firmly closed. I think the seal activated. Karen looked at him blearily, her face full of anger and worry. What? I think the seal activated. The door closed and you know Dad would never lock us in here. Plus I feel exhausted and with Kurama that shouldn't happen. So how do we get out? That door was undisturbed when we found it. Naruto conjured some light, felt a strange tug below him, but ignored it in favor of something else he spotted. There's another door. I'm betting that they added an air shaft to make sure anyone who came this way didn't die from suffocation, since the front entrance was pretty much blocked by the rubble. One way to find out, said Karen. It took them much less time to get out through the second entrance. A freshly bloodied hand later, and they were out. One look at the sun told them they had either been out cold for hours, or this wasn't their time. When they got to shore, they confirmed Naruto's guess. Minato Namikaze was the Hokage, and was still alive. More importantly, they were several months early before Naruto was born. Which meant they had several options. Option 1, go to the Hokage, forcibly remind him who he was and take him and Kushina back before they died. Not really an option, plus it might screw with the timeline too much. Option 2, infiltrate Konoha, wait until the Kyuubi was set loose, and then seal him with something less disastrous and kidnap the Hokage and his wife. Definitely doable, with plenty of leeway after. Option 3, head to Asgard, explain to Odin who and what they were, then come back and kidnap the still-sealed Thor after he reclaimed his hammer. Again, not really an option since it would take far too much time for them to believe them, and had the annoying side effect of possibly erasing themselves from existence. Option 4, let the timeline catch up with itself. So, option 2 then, said Karen. Well duh, the question is what are we going to do to kill time? I'll infiltrate the library. You keep your blonde hair under a henge or something and change your eyes so no one will recognize you later. Maybe I could convince Tuchiji-san to let me work as a ramen apprentice. Karen snorted. You'd eat all the stock. Maybe construction then, said Naruto. He was strong enough to haul things around. Or you could help at a blacksmithing shop. It's not like you don't have the strength for it, and no one would look twice at you creating your own weapons. Besides, isn't that hammer supposed to be good for making things? Naruto rubbed his chin. You have a point. On the other hand, there's no way in the cold realm of Helheim I'd ever make weapons with the hammer. It automatically imbues them with superior qualities, and that village sure as hell doesn't deserve anything made from it, said Naruto. Then leave it as a reserve or as your own personal weapon. With their plans made up and a few harmless changes to Naruto's hair color through local plants, a true prankster recognizes items that could change color to things like skin and hair, and suddenly, he was no longer a blonde. Though to be fair, with hair as light as his he could be any color he wanted. It wasn't until they were close to Konoha that Naruto realized a problem. Shit. We don't have passports and Konoha is a major village. We don't actually need any. We just have to claim we were jumped by missing Nin, and that we're Uzumaki trying to find the last heir. So long as our blood checks out, no one's going to look too closely at a pair of civilians. If anyone asks about our reflexes, tell them the truth. We play a lot of pranks on shinobi, and had to learn how to run like hell to get away from their revenge, said Naruto. Karen snickered because that was actually the real reason Naruto was so fast. He was used to outrunning Anbu, for Odin's sake. With that, the two continued on their way to Konoha. Naruto kept his copy of Mjolnir on hand, since he rarely bothered to carry around the real thing. For one thing, that hammer only made his tenuous control over the storm clouds he kept summoning worse, since he had yet to figure out the trick to it. Konoha gates. Passports. Yeah, about that. Said a red-haired teen with blue eyes. The guard looked up, saw a pair of red heads, and didn't look amused. The two in front of him looked like they had been walking a while, and they were scratched up pretty good. No passport, no entry. Oh come on. I did not just walk through bandit-infested wilderness, robbed by missing Nin, and have to deal with some smarmy pretentious old hag just to be told I can't get a proper hot bath, because of no passport, shouted the girl. She looked pissed and her eyes were twitching. He noticed a beaten-up old kunai in her hand that already had some dried blood on it. No self-respecting shinobi would keep something like that when they could buy new. Fine. But you're going to have limited access to anything until we verify you're not enemy shinobi. Names? Uzumaki Karen, said the girl. Uzumaki Erasure, said the boy. Ranks? Civilians, said the girl, though my brother had limited shinobi training before mother died. Mostly taijutsu and a limited amount of reinforcement. Purpose for visit? The brother rubbed his head awkwardly. Well, we always heard Konoha was supposed to be an allied village of Whirlpool, so they should have plenty of opportunities to be a blacksmith. And Karen has always loved to read, so she thought she'd try to be a librarian. You'll have to stay in the village without leaving for 3 months before a new passport may be issued. You will be interviewed by T and I for no less than an hour, and if you've proven to not be a threat, you will be allowed to live in Konoha as civilians. It took less than an hour before Kushina heard the news, and 2 more before she finally found the pair eating at Ichiraku's ramen. From the way they ate, most assumed they hadn't had a decent meal in some time. Especially with their clothes. Both of them turned when they heard the familiar sound of skidding behind them. Naruto finished what he had in his mouth before he had to comment. Escaping from a mass prank from shinobi hellbent on getting some payback? Kushina blinked. What makes you ask that? Because the only time I hear that sort of skidding on paved surfaces is after a well-deserved prank on idiots who've pissed me off, said Naruto. Kushina's grin didn't speak well for the shinobi of Konoha. No, but I did hear a pair of Uzumaki had shown up. Are you saying you're an Uzumaki? Said Karen, playing along with Naruto's lie. I'm the clan head. In that case, there's only one thing to say. Pull up a seat, cousin, and let's talk pranks, said Naruto, smirking. Minato had an ominous shiver go down his spine.